Hi students, we're going to talk about the midpoint formula. You had in a couple problems. Midpoint formula is between 2 points. X sub 1 comma y sub 1, that's 0.1. And x sub 2 comma y sub 2, 0.2. All the subs mean is 0.1 and 0.2. That's all it means. That's what those subs mean. So if I have those 2 points, the midpoint is the average. Midpoint equals average of x comma average of y. Okay, that's your 2 points. So how do I get the average? I add the 2. Since there's 2 of them, I add the 2 and divide by 2. X sub 1 plus x sub 2 all over 2, comma y sub 1 plus y sub 2 all over 2. Okay, so you can either think of it as average of x comma average of y, or you can say x sub 1 plus x sub 2 all over 2, comma y sub 1 plus y sub 2 all over 2. So let's do an example. So I have 1, 5, and negative 3, negative 8. I want the midpoint. Okay, so I add my x's. 1 plus negative 3 divided by 2. Add the y's. 5 plus negative 8 divided by 2. Now I do the math, and there's my answer. So I have negative 2 over 2, comma, negative 3 over 2. Well, which one of these can I simplify? Negative 2 divided by 2 is 1, and then I have negative 3 halves, or you can say negative 1.5 if you wanted to. Okay, so that's how midpoint formula. If you're given the 2 points, the 2 endpoints, you find the midpoint. Now, so that both of these were endpoints. Endpoint 1, endpoint 2. Okay, now let's say they go ahead and give you one endpoint in the midpoint. So I'll just call it endpoint 1 equals, let's say 1 comma negative 4, and the midpoint they tell you is, let's say, negative 1, 1. Okay, so now there are 2 ways to do this. I could, well, there's technically 3. I could use that midpoint formula and solve it, which most people don't do because it deals with more math. A lot of people like to graph. So if I was to graph this, 1, negative 4, there's 1, negative 4, and that's an endpoint. Okay, and then I have negative 1, 1 as a midpoint, M. So therefore I know the other endpoint has to be somewhere up there, because that's the midpoint. So how do I get that? I use the slope. I use slope. Okay, so how do I get? I start from the endpoint. I go up how many? 4 plus 1 is 5. So I went up 5, which is plus 5, and I went left or back 2. So I do that exact same thing again, and there's my other endpoint, up 5. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and back 2, right there. Okay, so I went up 5. We'll change the color so it's easier to see. Up 5, there's the plus 5 again, and left 2. And what are the coordinates at that point? That is my other endpoint. So this was negative 1, so it's negative 3, comma. I started at 1, and I added 5 to it. That's 6. So negative 3, 6 is that point. There's my other endpoint, endpoint number 2. So that's one way of getting it, using the slope. Another way is if I go ahead and write solve for x and y separately in a number line. I look at the x coordinate is 1 for one endpoint. The midpoint is negative 1. So it's on this side of that endpoint. So endpoint 1, midpoint, endpoint 2. Obviously the midpoint has to be in between the 2 endpoints. So how far is it from 1 to negative 1? Which direction I went? I went left 2. Or back 2. So I have to do it again, back 2. What's negative 1 minus 2? Negative 3. And there's that negative 3 right there. I do the exact same thing for the y. Y, what's my bottom y? Is 1. I mean, negative 4, sorry. So I have a -4 as one endpoint. Now the midpoint, that y coordinate, so it's the -4. The other y coordinate is at 1. I put it on the left this time because negative is less than positive. So -4 is over here. There's 1. How many do I go from -4 to 1? I went +5. So I must go +5 over here. 1 plus 5 is 6. And there's the 6 right there. Okay. So one of these two ways is the most favorite way of most people. If I was actually use the equation, then that means the midpoint of x is x sub 1 plus x sub 2 divided by 2. And then when I fill those in, the midpoint of x we know is -1. And then I have the endpoint is 1 plus whatever the other endpoint is of x divided by 2. So cross multiply, I get -2 equals 1 plus x sub 2. So x sub 2, I got to subtract that 1 across, makes it -3. And there's the -3 again for the x. And I do the exact same thing for the y. It'd be y sub 1 plus y sub 2 divided by 2. Fill in 2 of the 3. I only can have one missing piece. So the midpoint of the y is 1. Y sub 1 is -4. And I need y sub 2 that I'm solving for. Cross multiply, I get 2 equals -4 plus y sub 2. Last step, add the 4 across. So y sub 2 equals 6. Same answers. -3, 6. So there's the 3 ways of finding the other midpoint. You choose whichever one you like. I don't care which one you use on the quiz or the test. And DCAS doesn't care either when you take it at the end of the year, when you might have one of these. Okay, last thing I want to point out is, so that's just applying it to 2 points. 3 main ideas where the midpoint is used. In geometry. Okay. Number 1, mid-segment. There. I'm not explaining these now. These will come up. Number 2, finding the center of a circle given the endpoints to the diameter. Okay, and 3 is in centroids. And you are guaranteed to have a centroid problem and a mid-segment problem on it. Now, you're going to have multiple circle problems, but whether they give you this particular setup where they give you the endpoints of the diameter, I'm not sure, but that's a possibility. Okay. Centroid is finding the median. Okay. Finding medians. And that deals with goes from vertex to the midpoint of the opposite side. So there you see where it says midpoint in here. So when I'm given the opposite side, if I'm given the endpoints of the opposite side in the coordinate plane, I would have to find the midpoint, for example. So these are the 3 places where midpoint is used, the midpoint formula. You usually are not going to see just straight here, find the midpoint between these 2 points. That could be, but I can't remember if I've seen that or not. But you definitely see you'll see it with mid segments, centroids. They may or not make you find the midpoint in the centroid, but that they could, and so that deals with it if you had to. And they may or may not give you a circle problem that deals with finding the diameter, or given the diameter, you have to find the center, which is then finding the midpoint of those two endpoints. Okay, so that covers. So you don't have to know that. I'm just letting you know ahead of time where these are going to come into play later. And I'll be asking you what are the three main places after we've covered all this where you're going to use midpoint when we're reviewing for the DCAS at the end as well. All right, that does it.